We're gonna get her started. So, as we've talked about a little bit before in the preamble, the class today is gonna build the fundamentals and go over the kind of basics of nutrition as an athlete, and we'll kind of set the framework for the subsequent classes where we build on some of the basics that we've gone over today, and then kind of focus into a few topics that really impact you guys as athletes. So before we start on that, a bit about me. My name is Nikki. I'm one of the dietitians here. Dietitian is just a fancy word for nutrition expert. I graduated with a degree in dietetics from UBC. And my personal history as an athlete, I previously, as a younger athlete, did a lot of endurance sports, soccer, cross country, field hockey, track and field, and then in my later years transitioned into more strength and power sports, namely weightlifting. So if you are liking lifting weights in the gym, you're among like people. Lifting heavy things is my jam. So a bit of an overview of today. The framework that you see here is kind of that basics or fundamentals that we're going to build today and then continue to grow on in the next classes. So the purpose of the pyramid we have here is to really make sure that we build the fundamentals or the basics and get the essentials of your nutrition as kind of the building blocks, or that first level of the pyramid. So this first level, the adequacy, that's making sure you're having enough calories or energy and to fuel your training, because you can't dial in the higher levels like supplements, meal timing, your micronutrients without getting enough calories and enough of the basics for your body to utilize all of those tools. So we're going to spend most of our time today in these first two levels, focusing on the adequacy and the second level, which is the composition. So that's the bigger, the macronutrients that you've probably heard of before. Your protein, your carbohydrates, your fats, and there's one more basic one which I'll quiz you guys on later to see if you can catch it. Does that sound like an okay plan for you guys for today? Okay, so how that's going to all shake out is I'll talk at you guys for a little bit, then I'll give you guys a break, we'll do some exercises, we'll kind of put it into the real world and talk about your individual food that you eat and how this might apply to you, and then of course leave some time at the end for questions and answers. So, with that in mind, I've kind of alluded to it already. That first level is your adequacy, making sure you have enough calories, which is just a fancy word for energy that your body uses, to make sure you're fueling the basic functions that your body's doing, your day-to-day activities, and then it will pick fueling your activity and your sport and your recovery last. And that's why, especially as an athlete, this first level is so important and really can't be overlooked. Once you've built that first level, then the next one would be exactly what I alluded to earlier, so the composition, making sure you're getting enough of each of those big macronutrients, those big fuel types, to make sure that your body can really hone in each of the systems that you're using. So, a lot of people will already know that your protein, that's important for building your muscle. Your fat, that's important to metabolize and utilize fat-soluble vitamins, but also your hormones. And carbohydrates, those are going to be your quick fuel that your body's going to use preferentially to fuel your muscles and in part your training. Before I get too much more into that, do the first two levels kind of make sense to you guys? Yeah, okay. All right. I think the big caveat is that I want to say, if you're not addressing this first level, you're trying to build a pyramid on a base that's maybe too small, and then you're at risk of kind of toppling over the pyramid. That's the kind of analogy that I'm trying to get across. So the nutrient composition matters just as much as the calories when you're first starting to make changes to your diet for sports performance. And that's why it's kind of this first part that we go over, and then we get to build on the more fun stuff and honing in those higher levels, the flashy stuff that people talk about, you know, vitamins and mineral supplements, sports nutrition supplements, meal timing, things like protein or carbohydrate supplements around training. I can geek out on you guys on that all day long, but like I said, if we don't have those basic levels, that's where we gotta start. All right, so I got you guys a beautiful picture of some proteins. Do those look familiar to you guys? Are you guys kind of comfortable with what like protein-containing foods are? Yeah. Are there any that you can think of that aren't on the slide there? I think it's somewhat well-rounded, but it's not everything. Tofu, yeah. I think that top one there looks like cottage cheese to me. You know, and it's got some of the plant-based or like legume proteins. I think these are chickpeas, beans, and then mung beans, but tofu, if you've seen it before, would come in more of like a brick. So it's probably made out of a soybean. So it's a similar type of bean to that, but some people will eat all of the protein foods, some people will only eat some of them. It comes down to personal preference. Yeah. Yeah, so all foods are in reality a little bit of everything. So some fit more into one category and more exclusive in that category. Some will kind of merge all three categories. So peanut butter is a great example of one that spans, it's got some protein, it's got some fat, and it's got a little bit of carbohydrate to it. But it's, you know, when we start to get talking about like food pairing, I'd consider it your protein food when you're making sure you have all these categories checked for your meals and snacks. All right, and then carbohydrates. There's even more options possibly than what's on the slide there. But as I alluded to earlier, it's going to be your preferred energy source for your body's organs, including your muscles. So it's very important for athletes. A lot of people think about protein when they're talking about growing as an athlete and fueling their training, because it is important definitely for growing muscle mass, but just important as that is making sure that you have enough carbohydrates so that your body's using those to fuel your training over breaking down protein and converting it to carbohydrates to fuel your muscles. I know I got a little nerdy on you there. We'll go back to the easier questions. Can you guys think of some carbohydrate foods that aren't on the slide? This one's easier, there's lots. Yeah, go ahead. Bread, yeah. Yeah, we just got oatmeal up there, it looks like, which is a grain, but not necessarily a gluten bread. The pasta here would probably be the most similar to what you're talking about, bread, but anything that you can think of that's not up there? Rice would be a carbohydrate too. This one, do you happen to, it's not rice, but it's something similar. Do you know what it is? It's really tasty. It tastes almost like nutty. But it's a grain. I know, it's a tricky one. That looks like quinoa to me. Yeah, so quinoa is another great food that kind of fits into more than one category. It's primarily a carbohydrate food, but it also actually has a little bit of protein to it. So it spans those two categories a little bit. You'll notice around the perimeter, it also includes fruits and vegetables. So fruits and vegetables will have carbohydrates to kind of varying degree, but they'll mostly fall into that carbohydrate category. Typically, fruits and vegetables won't provide very much fats or proteins. But we'll get into why they're still important later. And then the last, still and most important category is fats. This one, like you mentioned, has some peanuts. Fats are the most calorically dense. So that's why you've got to make sure that you're having enough fats in your diet in the day to make sure you're getting enough calories. Building that base, right? They have almost like, so if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of calories, they have 9 calories per gram versus both protein and carbohydrates have 4. So it's a pretty substantial difference when you look at, if you get into the numbers of it. Fats could have an entire presentation to themselves about what roles they play in your body because they're so intertwined into so many of your body's processes. But I think what's most important for you guys as athletes is knowing that it's going to give you enough calories, it's going to be kind of your reserve energy source, and it's really important for your body's metabolism, which is kind of ruled by your hormones. And so making sure you're getting a variety of fats will make sure that your body has the kind of building blocks to make the hormones that it needs to run all of your systems. Can you guys think of any fats that aren't on there? Yeah.
Like milk or something?
Yeah. So up here is butter, and that's probably the most like high fat dairy product, but milk will have a little bit of all three. It's actually kind of pretty equal in its distribution depending on what milk fat or like what percentage of your milk you're buying. Yeah. What about you? Anything that you don't see up there, Kate?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What's the difference between butter and margarine?
Yeah, so butter is made from dairy. So it's made by like churning and churning and churning milk in a urn, and basically that separates the milk or the fat part of the milk from the other components that have more carbohydrates and more protein. And so it turns out like that after lots of, in the olden days, manual labor of turning. Nowadays, not so much, it's done more mechanically, but margarine is made from like oils. So depending on the type of margarine you buy, it might be made from like a corn oil, or they're getting more popular now where they're made of like avocado oil or olive oil. So it's those types of oils, and they're processed to become more solid at room temperature. Historically, that was done in a somewhat unhealthy way in Canada, and that's why they often get a bad rap. But depending on the margarine you're buying and with the like current regulations of how they're processed, the debate between is margarine better, is fat better, is like one that's constantly going back and forth. And I think at the end of the day, it's kind of what works for you, what you prefer, you know, what's in the fridge already. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. All right. We played this game kind of throughout, but is there any like favorite foods that you guys aren't sure about? Which category they fit in? Carrots. Yeah, they're going to be a carbohydrate food, and they're going to be one of those vegetables that have a bit more carbohydrates than some of the other ones. So depending on the vegetable or the fruit, sometimes they're more like water or just vitamins and minerals, and sometimes they're more dense in terms of calories and, in turn, carbohydrates. Yeah.
Would watermelon be a carbohydrate?
Yeah. Yeah. Typically, like the fruits and vegetables that are quite sweet will be mostly carbohydrates. Sometimes the part of carbohydrates we're not going to get into today, but we can get into another day, is fiber. So there's, within our carbohydrates category, there's actually multiple different types of carbohydrates, and that's why sometimes you'll have carbohydrate foods that taste quite sweet, like watermelon or an apple, and that's because it has more small sugars that your body can taste the sweetness to, versus like your bread, your quinoa, your pasta. Those still have carbohydrates, but the chain's really long. And so your body doesn't register those as sweet like it does with, you know, simple sugar or sugars and fruits. Yeah.
What would chocolate be?
Chocolate is primarily a fat, depending on the type that you're buying. But especially like the milk or like creamy chocolates, they'll be primarily fat. If you were to have something like a chocolate milk, then it might get you a little bit of protein, a little bit more carbohydrate, but I think mostly fat. Depending on if they add a lot of sugar to it, it might also be a carbohydrate food. Often when you're not sure, it's because it's kind of a little bit of all of them. Yeah. Okay, I told you guys I was going to test you. What's the other big thing that we need lots of, so we would call it a macronutrient, that I haven't mentioned? Yeah. Sugar? That's under carbohydrates. So yes, we need that. It fuels our training and it fuels our muscles, but there's another big one that we need every day. We eat or drink it every day, but we haven't mentioned water. Yeah. So I personally feel like it's the macronutrient that always gets overlooked, because when people are talking about counting calories or the ratios of foods that they eat, they'll talk about the big three. But hydration, especially as an athlete, is just as important. So it falls into that kind of basic first level. If you're underhydrated as an athlete, even as little as like 2 to 3% dehydration has shown to have an impact in the way that you're able to recruit your muscles. So training dehydrated is not your friend. Training, like being dehydrated throughout the day as a human, also not ideal, but training dehydrated as an athlete directly impacts your performance. And that's why I really wanted to like get it home for you guys that this is one of your macronutrients. Don't forget about it. Don't just think about the other three. Just because this one doesn't provide calories doesn't mean it's not just as important to making sure you're getting enough. We're going to go over the other two levels just kind of really briefly. And so if you think back to that beginning pyramid, the third level was nutritional density. And so that's talking about kind of the smaller parts of the foods that are still absolutely essential for us to function as humans and for us to be effective athletes, but they're just in smaller quantities. And so often you'll hear this term of like nutrient density, and that can refer to how many calories it are per kind of volume of food, or it can also be used in terms of how much like vitamins and minerals and all the other kind of smaller building blocks of what we need to fuel our body are in a food kind of per volume. So I told you in the beginning that fruits and vegetables were going to come back around. There they are again. And that's because fruits and vegetables are one of those foods that kind of like as a category as a whole, they're going to be super nutrient dense in terms of how much calories or how much the vitamins and minerals are going to give you per calorie or even per volume. So that's why you can't overlook these ones. Just focusing on making sure you get a protein food, a carbohydrate food, and a fat food, you're going to do yourself a disservice without getting into the nitty-gritty of like what vitamins and minerals we're talking about. Just make sure they're there. They're a part of your plate, or they're a part of your snacks. They're in there throughout the day. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. Do you guys have a favorite fruit or vegetable? Carrots? No?
Carrots or apples?
Carrots or apples, yeah. What about you, Kate?
I like cucumbers a lot.
Yeah.
And
Watermelon.
watermelon.
I could have guessed that one. I'm partial to the apples and the squash. So pumpkin is a type of squash, but I like them all. They're all yummy and tasty and delicious when roasted up. Okay. And I didn't put in a dedicated slide to that top level of the pyramid, but if you remember back, it was timing. And so just so we're going over the full amount of the pyramid, when I'm talking about timing, that's talking about when you eat your food in comparison to your training, but also what foods you're eating around your training time. And that can be like how you're eating it, whether it's a liquid or a solid, whether it's like a supplement, so you're getting, you know, just protein or just carbohydrates, or whether you're eating it as whole foods, and how like your whole day in terms of your nourishment kind of revolves around your training. So that's a part, you know, once you've built those first 3 levels, you can really maximize your sports performance in that top level. But you need the first 2 levels first, so start here. The other part that I like just don't want to make sure we don't overlook is we're talking about food as calories and nourishment and, you know, as protein foods and as carbohydrate foods, but inevitably there's aspects of food which that has nothing to do with. There's aspects of your food that you're eating for pleasure, which is totally okay. And there's aspects of your food that maybe you're making food choices based on social or family reasons, or, you know, maybe you don't do the grocery shopping, and so you have to kind of take all that into account and factor it in when you're talking about making nutrition changes. And I think that sometimes people overlook that. You know, you get too analytical if you're a kind of numbers person and you only look at the numbers and you don't look at like, well, what do I traditionally eat at home with my family? What foods do I enjoy? What are the social aspects of my life that maybe include food? And so that's why at the end of the day, I'm always going to be an 80-20 gal. So, you know, if you dial in your nutrition and focus on nourishing yourself and nourishing your training 80% of the time, you can rest easily knowing that those times that you go out with friends or the times that you're eating foods that you just enjoy, and maybe they're not centered around fueling yourself as an athlete, is totally okay, because that's going to make it sustainable. And you're just going to enjoy yourself as a well-rounded human who's not just muscles hitting the gym. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of homework because you haven't used your pages of paper yet. I want you to, and this is totally up to you, whether you want to draw or write. I'm not a very artistic person, so if I asked myself to draw, that would just be a shutdown moment. So draw what you guys would normally eat, or draw up a meal kind of from what you know is in your kitchen or your cupboards or your fridge right now. I'll give you guys a little bit of time.
We can write it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not a drawer either, so you can write. If you're a visual person and you want to draw me a beautiful picture, I love it. I'm on board. I like other people's art. I'm just not artistic. Make sure that you have enough food in your day through meals and snacks, and then making sure that you hit all 3 of those categories throughout the day. Once you've got, you know, those kind of that groundwork laid, that's when you can start to build on those higher levels of the pyramid. Any questions that came up, foods you weren't sure about, or meals in general? Yeah. Yeah. So, remember earlier when I talked about like there's different types of carbohydrates within that carbohydrate category? So the smaller ones that just have like 1 or 2 glucose molecules or sugar molecules are generally considered sugars. And within that, one of those types of sugars is lactose. And it's primarily found in dairy products. And so we can normally digest it, but some people, especially as you age in life, your body stops producing the enzyme that breaks it down from 2 sugars into individual sugars. And when it's stuck in your body as those two sugars bound together, you can't absorb it. We can only absorb carbohydrates as like one carbohydrate or one sugar molecule at a time. It'll just get stuck in your GI tract. It'll never get into the rest of your body. And so when you get that carbohydrate stuck like this as two sugar molecules, then that's when, if your body didn't digest it in your upper digestive tract where it makes those enzymes, then it's going to travel all the way through your lower digestive tract, and some of the healthy bacteria that's in your lower digestive tract will be able to absorb it or break it down. And they'll get to eat it, but they sometimes cause gas or bloating or some discomfort. And so kind of that full spectrum through your digestive tract of it being stuck like this is why some people who notice those side effects of, gas or bloating or just discomfort in general by products where mechanically, in processing as the foods, the manufacturer breaks it down for you in advance so that you don't have to worry about your body not making those enzymes. So if you notice that, sometimes when you eat dairy foods, you have some of those side effects, or even maybe you have like some urgency having to go to the bathroom after you eat dairy, that might be an indicator that maybe you just struggle a bit more with that breakdown process. And then the 21st century is great, and then we have so many of those products. Sometimes it's genetic. Some families just like don't ever make the gene to break that down, and you struggle your whole life with it. But also, there's plenty of literature out there, if you want to nerd out with me for a sec. If, for instance, you live with your parents who don't eat dairy, and you stop eating dairy, or you only eat lactose-separated or lactose-free products, your body, because it doesn't need the enzyme, will just stop making it. And then, you go to your friend's house and eat their cheese and their milk, and all of a sudden your body's like, what is this? What are you doing to me? So, yeah, just something to watch out for. Because you're still young, and assuming it's not a genetic thing, you might be able to like reintroduce dairy slowly and be able to like start producing those enzymes again. So give it a try. See? Yeah. Yeah? A little bit of chocolate with every meal? Like I said, 80-20. If that's your 20, I'm on board with that because I am also a chocolate lover. But it means that your other 80%, so the other food on your plate, your meal, you got to make sure it's well-rounded, and that part's the part that's fueling your training and fueling you as an athlete. And then your chocolate on the side is the part that's, like we talked about, for enjoyment, brings you pleasure, makes you happy, makes the mealtime just end on a high note, right? Yeah. You sound like a chocolate guy. Yeah. Would you eat all chocolate all the time if I said so? Yeah. Yeah, so maybe, finding ways that you can pick foods that are still delicious and chocolatey, but get you some more of those food groups, like maybe getting a chocolate milk that has some protein in it, then you still get, your chocolate flavor that you love so much, but you're getting more categories out of that food. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. All right. We kind of already phased right into this seamlessly, didn't we? But I want to make sure if there was any other questions about like specific foods you guys had written down that you weren't sure about, I answered those ones. Yeah. Yeah, soups are one of those great foods where inherently you'll get a little bit of everything, often soups will have like a animal protein like a chicken or a beef, but often sometimes, soups are one that more often people will eat those plant-based proteins that we were talking about earlier, like, the beans, the legumes, the tofu. So think like, miso soup, that has tofu in it, or like a chili, that's beans, kind of a soup, kind of a stew. And very often it'll have vegetables. And it'll hydrate you as well because it's going to get you fluids. So it's got that bonus in there that we don't forget about. Yeah. Depends on the soup though. Sometimes, you know, if it's just a broth and nothing else to it, it might just be hydration. No protein or no vegetables. Yeah. All right. Since you're here, Adam, any questions?
No.
No?
I don't think so. Not right now.
That's okay. I'm picking on you.
Okay. I'm a chocolate fiend as well too. So
Yeah?
Yeah.
I did see you nodding your head when you were like, ah, yes, chocolate milk. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But moderation.
80-20. I think you were out of the room for the 80-20 part, but I said, you know, I'm a moderation gal, you know, you got to pick things that are going to be sustainable for you. So if 80% of the time you're fueling yourself for training and 20% of the time you're eating that chocolate because you love it and it makes you happy, that's still going to make you a better, well-rounded human. You're going to be happier and more fulfilled and also nourished because you got the 80% out of the way. Yeah. Good. We're on the same page.